We begin on that profanity-filled rant by U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra. Hoekstra was at a high-profile event in Ottawa Monday meant to celebrate the Canada-U.S. relationship.
A witness says that he could be heard swearing, using the F word, and mentioning Doug Ford, his name, and that it appears that Pete Hoekstra was upset about this Ontario ad.
It began with a shocking outburst in the middle of Ottawa's most formal diplomatic evening. At a high-profile Canada-U.S. gala, U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra turned the room silent when he began swearing at Ontario's trade representative, David Patterson. Witnesses said the ambassador used profanity, even mentioning Doug Ford by name in front of diplomats and business leaders. The event was supposed to be a symbol of friendship. Every year, both countries raise their glasses for a joint friendship toast. But this time, only the Canadian side spoke. The American ambassador stayed seated. What should have been a quiet moment of goodwill turned into a public embarrassment and a sign of just how deep the rift between Washington and Ottawa has grown. The question now isn't just about one man losing his temper. It's about what that anger reveals, a frustration that runs straight from the Trump White House to America's closest ally.
Ambassador Hoekstra's anger didn't come out of nowhere. He was triggered by an Ontario government ad that aired across U.S. television screens. The ad used the voice of former Republican President Ronald Reagan, warning about the dangers of high tariffs, the same ad that infuriated Donald Trump days earlier. Trump declared that all trade talks with Canada were terminated and threatened a new 10% tariff on Canadian goods. Within hours, the mood in Washington turned from tense to explosive. Hoekstra, a Trump loyalist, seemed to take that anger personally. But underneath the surface, the outrage had little to do with advertising. It was about control. For months, Washington has tried to pressure Canada to yield in ongoing trade discussions. Instead, Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford, stood firm. They used calm diplomacy and sharp strategy rather than panic. The Ontario ad became more than just a TV spot. It became a quiet statement that Canada would no longer play by Washington's intimidation rules. And that, perhaps, is what truly set the ambassador off. When diplomats start shouting, it's usually because their arguments are failing.
Doug Ford's response was measured, confident, and unmistakably Canadian. Pacing reporters, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult back. He simply called on the ambassador to apologize and move forward. He reminded everyone that Ontario's trade representative had done nothing wrong. He was defending his province in the face of constant attacks. Ford even used humor to lower the temperature, saying the cheese slipped off the cracker. But behind the humor was a powerful message. Ontario would not be bullied, not by tariffs and not by temper. Ford framed the moment as a defense of both his province and his country. He reminded Americans that Canada was being targeted, its auto industry, its steel sector, its manufacturing base. And he made clear that rolling over was not an option. "When you attack our province, you attack our country," he said earlier this week. For ordinary Canadians, the scene felt familiar, frustration mixed with resilience. In Ford's tone, there was no hostility toward Americans themselves. He said, "We love Americans," separating people from politics. But he made no secret of how he viewed Trump's behavior. It was blunt, emotional, and deeply human, a reflection of how many Canadians now feel about their once trusted ally. While Ford was speaking publicly, Prime Minister Mark Carney remained silent, strategically silent. He was in South Korea at the time, attending the same summit as President Trump. The two leaders sat at the same dinner table, but didn't speak. Trump later posted online, "We didn't come to South Korea to see Canada." That silence, though, spoke volumes. Carney didn't need to trade insults. His policies have already begun reshaping Canada's trade position. Over the past months, Ottawa has finalized or expanded major economic agreements with the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and Australia. Canada is also deepening its investment links with ASEAN nations, a diversification strategy designed to reduce reliance on the U.S. market. In other words, while Washington has chosen confrontation, Ottawa is quietly building alternatives. Canadian exports to Asia and Europe are rising. New investments are flowing into critical minerals, nuclear technology, and advanced manufacturing. Former officials from both sides of the border have described the current climate as the lowest point in decades. John Manley, Canada's former deputy prime minister, said the relationship has shifted from partnership to performance, more theater than diplomacy. Gordon Giffen, a former U.S. ambassador under Bill Clinton, said ambassadors are supposed to deliver difficult messages, not profanity. He admitted that the outburst showed poor judgment and warned that the U.S. approach was undermining progress. Both men agreed that trust, once the backbone of the Canada-U.S. relationship, has been eroding fast. Canada's confidence in American reliability has been shaken. The United States, once seen as a predictable ally, now acts like a volatile negotiator. This breakdown is more than symbolic. Trade between the two countries accounts for nearly $800 billion a year, according to 2024 data from Statistics Canada and the U.S. Department of Commerce. But the tone from Washington is making long-term cooperation harder to sustain. What used to be a partnership of equals now feels like a power struggle.
The results of Trump's trade offensive are now clear. Automakers like Stellantis and GM have pulled investment from Ontario, yet rising costs and inflation inside the U.S. are straining supply chains and angering American workers. Rather than isolating Canada, Washington has isolated itself. European and Asian partners are strengthening ties with Ottawa, while the U.S. loses diplomatic goodwill even among its closest allies. Canada's leadership, meanwhile, has found a confident, steady voice. The Reagan ad, once a simple reminder of economic common sense, has turned into a symbol of how far U.S. trade policy has drifted from its own principles. Every insult from Washington only reinforces Canada's resolve to move independently. What Trump hoped would divide Canada has instead united it, around leaders determined to defend their economy and their dignity.
Back in Ottawa, the empty chair at the gala's toasts said more than any speech could. The United States, once Canada's closest friend, couldn't even share a glass of champagne. Carney's government continues its quiet path, expanding global partnerships, supporting industry, and rebuilding confidence. Ford stands publicly defending his province, demanding dignity and respect. Together, they reflect a new phase of Canadian identity. Steady under pressure, firm in principle. Meanwhile, Washington's outbursts keep making headlines. When ambassadors swear and presidents post insults, it doesn't show power, it shows frustration. In the end, Trump's tariffs didn't break Canada. They revealed its resilience. The louder Washington shouts, the calmer Ottawa seems. And in that silence, in the moment when only one side raised a glass, the world saw what real strength looks like.
Currently, 25% of our soybeans grown in the United States, 1 out of every 4 rows of soybeans goes to China. Right now, China has purchased 0 soybeans. That is a 5-alarm fire for our industry.
Across the Midwest, soybean fields are being harvested, but something is missing. For decades, China bought 1 out of every 4 rows of soybeans grown in the United States. That market has now disappeared. According to farm groups and trade trackers, China has purchased 0 new crop soybeans from the United States during this harvest season. The U.S. Soybean Export Council has called the situation a crisis, and farmers on the ground describe it as devastating. They are confronting rising input costs, uncertain profits, and shrinking buyers. Many point out that they do not want aid checks from Washington. What they want is access to markets. The promise that tariffs would protect rural America has turned into an empty field.
Up to 35 cargoes. That's the number of shipments of soybeans China is believed to have purchased from Argentina this week. The move is seen as a blow right now to U.S. soybean producers, as the world's largest soybean importer has still not purchased any U.S. new crop soybean.
While American bins fill up unsold, China has quietly turned to South America. Reports from September show Beijing buying as many as 35 cargoes of soybeans from Argentina in just 1 week. That equals about 2.7 million metric tons.
The reason was simple. Argentina briefly suspended its 26% export tax to stabilize its currency, making its soybeans nearly $3 a bushel cheaper than U.S. beans. That discount was enough to draw China in, and once the sales were locked, Argentina reinstated the tax. Analysts say that the purchases likely cover China's needs through November. After that, Brazil enters harvest in January, pushing even more supply onto the global market. This means the American window to sell into China has narrowed to almost nothing. The U.S. Department of Agriculture may be forced to revise down its 1.7 billion bushel export forecast for the 2025-26 marketing year by as much as 150 to 200 million bushels. If that happens, futures prices sliding under $10 a bushel become likely. A policy designed to protect American farmers has instead created a hole that others are rushing to fill. As American farmers lose ground, Canada is seizing new opportunities. On September 24th, Ottawa signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with Indonesia. This is Canada's first free trade deal with a member of ASEAN, and the timing is telling. Indonesia imports between 2.6 and 2.7 million tons of soybeans each year, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Most of that is used for tofu and tempeh, staples of Indonesian diets. The United States has long been the dominant supplier, but Canada already holds close to 10% of the market. With the new CEPA agreement, Canada can expand its footprint in Southeast Asia, ensuring lower barriers and stronger ties for its farm sector. While American farmers are left hoping China comes back, Canadian producers are preparing to ship more to Jakarta and beyond. The contrast is striking. Put together, the story is clear. Trump's tariffs were meant to force concessions and show loyalty to U.S. farmers. Instead, they shut off the biggest buyer, handed sales to Argentina and Brazil, and pushed Canada toward new deals in Asia. At the same moment American farmers face overflowing silos, Canadian producers are locking in access to a growing market of 270 million people in Indonesia. This is the very definition of a backfire. Trade policy designed as a weapon has ricocheted. Farmers who were promised protection are paying the price, while competitors are filling the gap. The lesson is that in global agriculture, markets do not wait. When one door closes, another country will walk through it. And today, that country is not the United States.